Connecting. I have some friends coming up to help me with the scripture reading this morning, so you guys can make your way up here. I've got 5 readers for our text. Yes, come on up. Our text this morning is from Psalm 107. It is a celebration psalm. It's a Thanksgiving celebration psalm. God has brought Israel back together from the north, the south, the east, and the west. And so they are celebrating that. In fact, in Psalm 106, the psalmist says with desperation, "Save us, Lord, our God, and gather us from the nations, that we may give thanks to your holy name and glory in your praise." And so the movement from Psalm 106 to 107 is that Psalm 107 is the celebration of the answer to the prayer. Because in Psalm 106, this was the prayer recounting the fact that God had disciplined the nation and let Nebuchadnezzar carry them off in exile. He had conquered Judah. He had conquered Jerusalem. And those who were left, who were part of the upper leading class and merchants, they had been all dragged off in chains to Babylon. And there in Babylon, they suffered. And do you know that the human mind really can't stand not knowing how long you're going to suffer? If you've ever been on a hiking trip with a kid, the kid's like, "When are we done?" Have you ever been on a drive with a kid, the kid asks, "Are we there yet?" Because it's painful. It's painful to not know how long the suffering is good. I remember the first time I hiked the Grouse Grind. I was so happy when that 1/4 marker came up. You're 1/4 of the way, and I'm like, my heart feels like it's going to jump out into my hands. I'm suffering too much here. Wow, what a celebration when I got to the 3/4 mark. And I was like, I'm almost there. The human mind hates not knowing how long our suffering is going to be. We actually have to make a shift. Gratitude is part of the shift. Anticipating gratitude is part of the shift. Your gratitude story shapes your future, and Israel knows it. That's why we're about to hear from those in the north, the south, the east, and the west, and we're going to hear the call to wisdom, the wisdom of gratitude.
Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the lands, from east and west, from north and south.
Some wandered in desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. For he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things.
Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains, because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the plans of the Most High. So he subjected them to bitter labor. They stumbled, and there was no one to help. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of the utter darkness, and broke away their chains. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. For he breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through bars of iron.
Some began Some became fools through their rebellious ways and suffered affliction because of their iniquities. They loathed all food and drew near the gates of death. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them. He rescued them from the grave. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them sacrifice thank offerings and tell of his works with songs of joy.
Some went out on the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In their peril, their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. They were glad when it grew calm, and he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. Let them exalt him in the assembly of the people and praise him in the council of the elders.
He turned rivers into desert, flowing springs into thirsty ground, and fruitful land into a salt waste. Because of the wickedness of those who lived there, he turned the desert into pools of water and the parched ground into flowing springs. There he brought the hungry to live, and they founded a city where they could settle. They sowed fields and planted vineyards that yielded a fruitful harvest. He blessed them, and their numbers greatly increased, and he did not let their herds diminish. Then their numbers decreased, and they were humbled by oppression, calamity, and sorrow. He who pours contempt on nobles made them wander in the tactless waste, but he lifted the needy out of their affliction, and increased their families like flocks. The upright see and rejoice, and the wicked shut their mouths. Let the one who is wise heed these things and ponder the loving deeds of the Lord.
Let's read that last verse together, all together. Let the one who is wise heed these things and ponder the loving deeds of the Lord. It may seem strange, but your troubles are an invitation to call on God. Jesus had said, you will have troubles in this world. He never suggested that those who follow Jesus are somehow protected and guarded from all the troubles. In fact, Jesus did pray for his disciples, oh, Father, protect them from the evil one. He did want us to be protected from troubles. But God also recognizes in his sovereignty something significant about our troubles, that our troubles can elicit a seeking for him. That our troubles can soften the proud heart to be open to him. That our troubles can press some of us to look for answers. And so for some reason, God has not yet removed us from all troubles or our troubles from all of us. Anybody here had trouble this year? We've all had troubles. I didn't say, oh, you're so blessed. But we've all had troubles this year, maybe last year. I was really intrigued the first time watching The Chosen. I had never really considered what was the backstory to the great miracle on the sea of the great catch of fish? I had never considered that there might be a backstory why a great catch of fish was needed. You all may know the story of Jesus telling his disciples, the men who would become his disciples, put out into the deep water and let the nets down. Let's catch a lot of fish. And they were like, hey, we've been fishing all night. Not your territory. You're a carpenter, right? And he says, put the nets down and you'll catch a great number of fish. But we've been fishing all night. But Peter says, because you said it, I'll do it. And so he dropped his nets and caught such a large number of fish. I'd never considered that maybe Peter had a debt and needed the fish to pay the debt. I'd never really considered that Peter had a debt and needed that large catch of fish, with the possibility that, debts tie you down. And having that debt paid made him free to be able to say, if Jesus says follow me, I'll follow it. Because he's free. I mean, I know some of you have school loans and you're like, won't Jesus come and pay my loan for me? Yeah. Because there's a certain freedom that comes. So I'd never considered, and I love that sort of imagination in The Chosen, to say, maybe there was a purpose. How many of you have seen The Chosen? If not, I didn't really give you a spoiler that Jesus caught some fish. It's in the Bible. But Jesus said things like, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And hunger and thirst shows up in this great psalm. Great trouble shows up. In fact, there's 4 kinds of people facing distress in this psalm. There's the wanderers who are in the desert. Maybe you caught that. They were wanderers in a desert. They had hunger and thirst. They could find no way. They were sort of lost. And then they cry out to God in their distress, and he shows up. He led them. He satisfies them. Then there's also the prisoners. The prisoners are in prison because of their wrongdoing, or perhaps the tyranny of the governor. And they found themselves in darkness and wasting away, suffering there because of their rebellion against God's commands. The commands, it says, that they despised. They despised the plans of the Most High God. And so they ended up imprisoned by that. These are all metaphors for Israel, that Israel, in a sense, had wandered off and then were taken off into captivity. That Israel had despised the way of God, and so then they had been taken off into the prisons of Nebuchadnezzar. That Israel had become sick because of their sin. And some of them had become so sick that they sat at the gates of Sheol. We might call it hell. That it was almost as if they were at the edge of the grave, ready to just fall off into death. They were so sick. The word here for the sick ones is fools. We feel anxious about that word because Jesus said, if you call anyone a fool, you're in danger of Sheol. You're in danger of hellfire and judgment. And so, I don't know, are you reluctant to call each other a fool? Good. But they use the term here to speak of a fool as one who just keeps going on their way headlong with no thought of the consequences. Someone who's destroying by their own decisions, their health, their reputation, their household, even their own self. They're a fool. It's almost as if they can't help themselves. And yet here, the fool cries out to God, and God comes and helps. And so in this metaphor of distress, the wanderer, the prisoner, the sick, we see Israel being carried off into captivity, and this is descriptive of their life and their experience. And finally, there's the sailors. This is an interesting one because Israel wasn't really known for sailing. They tended to avoid the seas. They had some superstition about the ocean and the seas. Great monsters in the sea. Job describes Leviathan as this great unpredictable creature that only God could tame. But these merchants were like business people who are going about their way and trying to manage the life and predict the stock market, predict how things were going to be. Anybody in business? The entrepreneur? And you're like, I need this. But you're cast on the waves of unpredictability. It's like a storm. But also we experience storms. We experience some of our troubles as if they are a storm. And so those sailors, it says, reeled and staggered as if they were drunkards. They were at their wits' end. How many Adventures in Odyssey people do we have here? Yeah. Wits end. This is where it comes from. Right here. That moment where you're at your wits end and you are convinced that you don't have the solution. You're convinced that you cannot predict the future. You're convinced that you cannot control your life. You are at your wits' end. Would you ask your neighbor, have you been at your wits' end? And I love what it says there. He stilled the storm and calmed the waves. It's just what Jesus did. I believe Psalm 107 echoed in the lives of the disciples as they sat on that boat, and they were so scared in the storm that they were going to drown and die, and Jesus is sleeping. Have you ever felt like God was sleeping? That God somehow was inaccessible, uncaring, and not present to you? The disciples were with Jesus in the boat in a storm, and they asked, do you not care? And then the writers in the gospel echo the words of the psalm to say, he stilled the storms to a whisper. I called, you answered. The thing that we really need to take from Psalm 107 is that God does indeed desire to hear our cry. He does indeed desire to hear our call for help. I have had friends who've served in prisons and jails, and they talk a lot about jailhouse religion. That there in that prison, it's that moment of, I'm at my wit's end, I don't know what to do, maybe I'll try God. And so I'll try God on for a while. And in the storm, in the prison, in the sense of being close to death, they cry out to God. Some make bargains with God. If you do this, then I'll do that. Others just cry out and surrender their life to God. Others of us, though, are too proud. We like to put together puzzles. Any puzzle people here? Do you like puzzles? You know, I like puzzles too. I grew up in a household that did a lot of puzzle making. My dad would always show up to do the puzzle, and it was when the last piece was ready. That was his extent of doing puzzles. But one of the things that's said about puzzle people, I'm sorry, is that we like putting puzzles together because we like the control of a human-made problem. It's a human-made problem. It has borders, it has colors, it has evidence that surely it came from the same sheet and was cut, and all the pieces are supposed to be here, and the mind finds some comfort in this motion of looking. I know it goes here somewhere. I know it's going to fit, unless they played a cruel trick on you. There is a comfort and a soothing in the life of the puzzle people. Maybe some of us need to put more puzzles together. But I often find myself surprised and intrigued by the cries for mercy that I find in common culture around us. The cry out to God that comes from those who don't yet know God and maybe are not keyed into the life of God. And yet, in that moment, they realize this problem is bigger than me. It's not just a puzzle. It's my very life. Is there one who knows my life? And I could cry out to them. Recently, I was pointed towards the last show in the season of Invasion. I don't know that you all have watched it, but many people in Canada are watching the show Invasion. It's a bit of a horror show in terms of alien invasion and what that's going to look like. There's a character in there, Mitzi. And throughout the whole first season, there is no mention of God. There's no mention of religion. There's no evidence of religion and religious places all about. But in that last session, in the closing remarks, there's a prayer. It's in Japanese with English subtitles. And Mitzi says, God, I don't know where you have been for these last few months. I have known suffering for most of my life, and I've never asked you for help. But I'm asking now, help us. We have not always deserved your grace. We've not always deserved your world. But we are fighting for it now. All of us together. And we can't win this fight without you. Please deliver us this miracle, please. I wonder if in this show we're actually hearing the cry of others in this world, calling out to the God that they have not known and hoping that God will answer. God loves for his people, his children, his creation, to call out to him. God is waiting for you to call out to him. In fact, there's a little message inside of this psalm that suggests that when you weren't caring for God, God was caring for you. It's a little message inside of this psalm. When you were not caring for God, God was caring for you. Now, dear church, sometimes we misinterpret the anxious moves of a world seeking God. I've been following an author named Steve Cuss. He was on an airplane, and he says that on that plane, they came to the end of the flight, and they all stood up. They were getting ready to stand up and go out. And a young girl came running down the aisle, pushing past everyone. And he says, just instinctively, he put his arm out like this and said, "None shall pass." Like Gandalf, yes. We're all trying to get off this plane. Let's wait our turn. The family who was trailing behind the girl as she ducked under his arm and went on had words for him that he says cannot be shared. And off she went. And he says internally he was fuming. A flight attendant came to him and said, "This teenage girl has been experiencing a panic attack since midway in the flight and desperately needed assistance. The family had been trying to help her. The family was not rude, they were desperate." And so he says this, "How did I, a former chaplain trained to notice physiological signs of stress, miss that this young lady needed help? How did I let my core value of courtesy block my capacity to see what was really going on? I was operating out of an assumption and was unable to see reality rather than see that this young lady needed help getting off the plane. All I could see was her rudeness and the rudeness of the family skipping the line, and I had to intervene. You shall not pass." What's your motivation towards a world crying for God? The good news is God sees and God hears and God acts and God delights to hear the cry. Israel had experienced it. When they were in Egypt, it had been told to them over and over and over that God heard, God saw, and God came to be their Redeemer, to restore life to them. I believe that if we constantly live in gratitude, we can temper our assumptions towards the world. That gratitude itself moves us towards a kind of humility to say, I didn't get here just by myself. Someone else helped me. Humility with gratitude gives a reasonable doubt to others to say, maybe the story I'm telling myself isn't the full story. That those who live in gratitude actually shape a different future for themselves and others. Gratitude actually generates wisdom for life. The thankful church is a church that actually blesses its community. The thankful church is the church that's always seeking, how can we also give? We've been given so much, and I'm thankful. Now I can give to others. Because I remember that God is the one who has the power to deliver, the power to restore, the power to redeem my life. Do you have a gratitude story? Do you have a gratitude story about your family? A gratitude story about friends that have been given to you? A gratitude story about faith that has been given to you? A gratitude story about health that has been given to you? A gratitude story about a place that you occupy for a while and not forever, but a place, a land that has blessed your life? Do you have a gratitude story about work, which means income, usually? Some kind of work that you're doing. What's your gratitude story of how God has provided for you? Do you have one? One of the things I hope you will do this week is that you will rehearse your gratitude story. We do that a little bit with the original moment. Look back in the week and rehearse and remember and then rehearse how to tell that story, because you telling your gratitude story actually creates hope for the journey. If you're a parent, it's your gratitude story of walking uphill both directions to and from school that actually gives hope to your children. It's the kind of gratitude story that a grandmother told to her granddaughter. Her granddaughter had experienced a terrible failure at school and was crushed. And her grandmother said, "It's okay. I want to tell you a story. Do you remember your grandfather, my husband? He was an amazing man. We had so many happy days together. And he was dying. In his dying breath, he motioned for me to come close, and I leaned my ear down to him. And he says, 'Oh, Alice, when I die, God will still give you many happy days afterwards.'" That's a gratitude story. It generates hope for the journey. If you are not telling your gratitude stories to your friends who need hope, start telling them. If you're not telling your gratitude stories to your children, start telling them. If you're not telling your gratitude stories to your parents, it goes better than trying to preach to your parents. Tell your gratitude story of how God showed up in your life. Tell your gratitude story, but it begins with remembering that God showed up in your troubles. I have so many of them. But the main gratitude story in my life is that as a lonely 9-year-old, I sat in a Sunday school class with Molly McCracken. And Molly McCracken said, "Jesus wants to be your friend." And I remember thinking, I don't have friends. I need a friend. I want Jesus to be my friend. And she said, Jesus has taken care of anything that would have kept you from being a friend of God. I was like, well, that's good news. I'm going to say yes. And then she read from John 15, I did not choose you, but you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that would last. Then you may call on my heavenly Father, and he will give you anything that you ask. So Operation 1516 is very personal to me in this season, because it always reminds me of these verses where Jesus says, I don't call you slaves, but I call you friends. You didn't choose me, but I chose you. I was asking for friends, and he gave me the greatest friend in the universe. In a moment, we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper, in which we remember the redemption of God. We remember the deliverance of God. We remember that God has shown up when we called and even when we didn't call on him yet. Maybe for some of you, this is just an introduction to the idea of even being thankful. You might say, thankfulness is really not part of my culture. I mean, my mom, I grew up in a culture where the parents and adults around me would say, you better be thankful. But we're not saying that. We're actually suggesting that in the life with God, in God's economy, gratitude and humility actually generates wisdom for life. It's not about shame. It's not about guilt. It's not about fear. It's about